is about when choir has a greater good. I'm going to share the screen here and talk really quick. My parents were very active people, especially my mother. She was a PTA president, Sunday school teacher. We were raised in Boy Scouts, all boys, and we were really taught to serve and to help community and to build community. So I guess that's always been in my blood. And as an educator, I think of music as being maybe 50% of the job for me as a teacher, and the other 50% are as making responsible citizens and people who are going to go out and hopefully make this world a better place. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk about some of our trips in that, and let's start sharing here if I can get this to work. Voila. Our domestic trips have gone all over the United States: Chicago, Miami, Anchorage, where we've been every major city, I think. We've also taken 8 international tours, which have included the British Isles, Spain, Costa Rica, Baltics, Russia, Germany, New Zealand, Austria, Argentina, and Uruguay were our most recent. My very first, I would say, attempt, hold on a second, make sure, there we go, at doing something for helping humanity was a concert way back in 1985. It was the end of my first year. There was a famine in Ethiopia, and we called our program Singing to Save. We donated all of our money to a famine cause, and we made a whopping $400. The next major tour that we did was to New York City. It was called our Brotherhood Tour. It was probably the first humanitarian tour. September 11th, 2001, a day none of my high school students were even alive during that time. I was listening to the news and heard that a plane had struck the World Trade Center in New York City. I assumed it was just a little Cessna and that it had gotten blinded in the fog, or that a pilot had had a heart attack or something, but it didn't take long for reality to set in. The idea to travel to New York City occurred soon after this catastrophe. So in mid-September, I stood in front of a room full of parents at back to school night, and I said, we all need not to be afraid to get on a plane ever again, and we need to support the people of New York. Many of the people in the room balked at that moment, but to my surprise, by mid-October, there was only one student not going with me on the trip of 70 students in concert choir. We also had a team of leadership students and teachers from San Ramon High who traveled to New York and volunteered at Ground Zero for 2 weeks in the early fall months. So we had a tight connection there. On this trip, I would have to say we were really mostly tourists just spending our money. We took in several Broadway shows, The Lion King, I aided the producers, but what was interesting is at the end of the shows, all of the actors came out on stage and they applauded the audience. They said, I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but tourism in New York City is down 90% of normal rates. Thank you so much for being a part of those in our country who are brave enough to actually get on a plane, spend your money at our restaurants, our shops, and yes, still come out and see a Broadway show. Without you, we wouldn't have any jobs. You are our heroes. Something new had also happened during this time. Security everywhere was heightened, and there was no congregating allowed. You also couldn't leave your luggage or backpacks unattended anywhere. We were even asked not to sing at several public venues because it would gather a crowd, and the police quickly ordered us to disband, even though we were singing patriotic songs in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral. And there were new rules for plane travel with mandatory screening and metal detectors for the very first time. And at some point, we also had to start taking off our shoes just to get on a plane. There were many highlights to this New York trip other than what we normally do. What we normally do is give informal in-class exchanges with other high schools or college choirs, and we sing in beautiful churches and cathedrals with fantastic acoustics. We also do lots of cultural and historical visits and moments. One of my fondest memories from this trip was being at Ellis Island and singing the folk hymn Shenandoah in the Great Hall of Immigration. You see it there on the bottom. It was magical and it was mystical. Everyone, singers and bystanders, were tearing up and crying. This is a definite keepsake for me in my career. We flew into New York at 10 o'clock at night, and looking out of the plane about to land at LaGuardia Airport, we saw 2 massive beams of light projecting skyward where the Twin Towers had been. This again is another sight I will never forget. We actually got to walk around at Ground Zero and we saw what a war-torn nation really looks like. And on Sunday morning, we sang at a Black gospel church in Harlem, doing what we do best, sharing our love for music with others. And after the church service, we had a soulful brunch at Sylvia's restaurant in Harlem, which was followed by open mic singing, which is always great with our kids. Lastly, I remember meeting wonderful people on every corner and knowing at every intersection that they understood exactly the amount of courage it took for us to go through the new security measures, to get on a plane, fly clear across the country to help those in need in the Big Apple. Our next humanitarian tour was a rebuild and renew tour to flood-ravaged New Orleans in the spring of 2006. Hurricane Katrina belted the city of New Orleans in late August of 2005. The aftermath of the flooding was actually much worse than the hurricane itself. Because many of the neighborhoods and parishes are actually below sea level, there are a large number of pumps that are used for draining the normal excess water. But these pumps become completely overworked and many systems failed. In total, over 300,000 homes were lost. Compare that to only 3,000 in the Oakland fire. It wasn't long before we were on board to go to New Orleans the first week back at school. This tour was billed as Rebuild and Renew, and we bumped up our efforts from what we had done in New York City. This time we decided to raise money to help out. And within 4 months, my students had collected $4,000 to donate to several needy causes in New Orleans. We donated over $1,000 for landscaping at an elementary school, St. Elizabeth's. Because of the flooding, they had lost all of their topsoil and no plants existed. We sent them the money in advance so the school administrators could purchase the items, topsoil, and plants for us. And then when we arrived, we spent a half a day working on their planter beds and medians. My students really dug into this project with all their heart and soul. Our next big donation was giving $2,000 to the Second Harvest Food Bank in New Orleans. The money was spent on food that was to be sent to needy families, but we also worked at the facility one afternoon. Half of my students worked inside on an assembly line, boxing a combination of canned foods with vegetables, proteins, carbohydrates for needy families. The other half of the students were outside smashing aluminum cans. You see, the food bank had a huge supply of not bottled, but canned water. But this water tasted metallic, people wouldn't drink it, and so it was useless and had to be discarded. I'm not sure which group had more fun, but they all enjoyed that day. New Orleans was still an absolute mess when we got there. As one woman said, we lost all of our worker bees. They have left for places like Houston and other places in Texas. At many restaurants, we had to eat on paper plates with plastic utensils because there were no workers to do the dishwashing. I also remember the menus being extremely limited. We told our bus driver we wanted to actually see the devastation, so she drove us to her son's neighborhood, took us to his house, and we got out and walked around the neighborhood. It was eerie and haunting to be in this desolated place and to peer into the homes and see firsthand how tremendous the damages were. Our driver said, there ain't gonna be people living on this street for at least 10 years. Before we left on this tour, I had placed a bid on an online auction and we won. The bid was to commission a composer to write a song specifically for your choir. We happily donated our last $1,000 to the New Orleans Children's Choir, and the song that was written for us was called Hope is the Song. Other highlights from our tour included singing at 8 different high schools in the greater New Orleans area and at several churches and cathedrals. But we also went to an actual alligator farm, which was really scary to some of the students. I mean, we were really in the alligator ponds with these up to 12-foot-long creatures. We took a day trip to Baton Rouge, where we visited the Capitol building, where Huey Long spoke eloquently on the Capitol steps decades prior. We also visited a really cool museum to the state of Louisiana. In New Orleans, we learned what FEMA stands for and what a FEMA trailer is, and we found out just how hard they were to obtain. We went to Oak Alley, a plantation in a Greek revival antebellum style. One night we had a Creole dinner, and they brought in a Zydeco band for us, and their senior citizens actually taught my students what social dancing was. Notice they're touching, holding hands, and doing ballroom. And everywhere we went, people gave our singers a plethora of thanks and a plethora of Mardi Gras beads. We also made a stop at Mardi Gras World, where they store all of the floats for the annual Mardi Gras parade. And as with our New York tour, I'd have to say the people we met were a highlight. Everyone was genuine, and everyone was truly thankful for our visit. One 10-year-old boy from St. Elizabeth's School wrote us a long thank you letter, which still today hangs in my office. It ended with, "I can't believe you folks came all the way from California to help us. People you don't even know. Before you came, our school was ugly. Now it's pretty again. I feel much happier going to school because you have shown that people really care." And last but not least, who can pass up eating hot beignets at Café du Monde? And this brings us to one of our more recent tours just 2 years ago to Houston. Hurricane Harvey hit Houston in August of 2017. My mother was actually there during the event because her husband was having stem cell therapy for lymphoma at MD Anderson Medical Center in Houston. So I was keenly aware of what was going on with minute-by-minute updates from Mom. The flooding in Houston was much more widespread than it was in Katrina, but the overall damage wasn't nearly as bad, and it was much more limited. In New Orleans, 80% of the city was actually underwater. However, Katrina and Harvey each cost their cities about $125 billion in insurance and repair costs. Unlike New Orleans, this tour was actually focused more on the schools which were damaged. We chose to adopt Pasadena High School, which is in a very industrial area with many refineries, much like if you were living in Richmond next to Standard Oil and attending Perez Elementary School, which happens to be San Ramon Valley High School's adopted sister school. We raised $2,000 for the school, which helped them buy uniforms to wear at concerts, funded entrance fees for music festivals, and we purchased classroom music and materials for them. By the time we arrived in Houston 7 months after Harvey, there was almost no evidence of the storm. Life pretty much seemed normal and regular. But we had donated the money to Pasadena High School back in the fall so that they could have a sense of normalcy to their school year. There was also more devastating news. In the aftermath of the hurricane, one of the students in the choir had committed suicide. Many students had lost all their possessions and clothes, and some had even been living out of their cars. It was a desperate situation, much different from the scenarios most of my students experience in this bubble called Danville. So, highlights of our Houston tour. One of the first things we got to do was take a tour of the NASA Space Center. That was totally cool. We also had a great time at the Houston Museum of Natural Science, where paleontology exhibited fascinated us all. We had great performances at both the Co-Cathedral of Houston and at Christ Church Cathedral. And we also enjoyed performing for the Houston School of the Visual and Performing Arts. Oh, and I forgot to mention, we did have a little extra time to drive to Galveston, where we experienced fun life on the Gulf of Mexico. But with all our tours, meeting the students at Pasadena High School, doing informal concerts together, and seeing our kids interact and sharing our music is what makes it all work. I hope that years from now, my students will be passing on the lessons they have learned about contributing to others and being responsible citizens to their children and to future generations. That's it.
Thank you very much, Ken. And why don't we open it up to the group for some questions. So if anybody has a question, you can just chime in or wave your hand if you want. Barbara, go ahead, unmute.
Oh.
There we go, I unmuted
I
you.
was clapping. I was doing reactions.
Oh, another
That
clap.
That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
A second.
Awesome.
All right,
Now,
any
how do you raise the money to go?
Well,
70?
we donated money that we had been that we would normally raise at our concerts from admission fees, and instead of keeping that for the program, we donated that. And students also did fundraisers on their own, like a car wash, and something as simple as a car wash, when they really work their butts off all day long, can bring in as much as $2,000. Rotary should do more car washes.
have very clean cars, yeah.
That's great.
Okay, Mike Burton, you're on. Unmute.
Hello, Ken.
There
Have
we go.
your students, to your knowledge, gone on to any great success in the theater or with their singing careers?
I have had limited success, but I do have one girl who is into right now kind of country western music and writing her own music. And she was on a TV show called The Voice 2 years ago. And right now she's in a brand new show, which is out of Nashville, which deals with singers and who are songwriters. And so that's another online competition or reality show that she's doing, Kylie Rothfield. And just a month ago, we had a student on America's Idol, Grace Lear. She made it into the top 10.
Oh, wow. That's great.
But I would say overall, I hope that music is a passion and an avocation for them for lifelong learning. I have many students, about 6, who have gone on to become music teachers, and I think that makes me happiest.
Yeah. Wow. What kind of a reaction did you get from the kids when they got home?
Home from the tours?
Oh, you're muted.
You muted.
Unmute.
Then unmute.
Oh. What kind of reaction do you get from the kids when they get home in terms of how they talk about those trips, especially to the really torn areas afterwards?
I think it's a life lesson. I don't think they forget it because you experience it much differently than watching it on TV. I mean, when we were in New Orleans and we got off a bus and the woman said, "That is my son's house and he's never going to live there again." And you walk up in the door and you look in and you see the wet photographs on the floor and know that life changes forever. I think that makes a strong impression, and certainly stronger than any visual thing that you could see in media. So I think it's positive.
That's great.
Leslie?
Yeah, question about being a high school teacher and dealing with this closing of the high schools. And can you talk a little bit about what your responsibilities as a teacher are as far as online learning, how it's worked, struggles, et cetera, and what it's like to create a whole new curriculum?
Good. It's especially hard for me because as a choir director, we're supposed to be together as a team and doing something as a collective body, and that's not happening anymore. And you can try to do it remotely, but I don't think it's very successful. I didn't find it very useful. So all the music teachers in our district, instead of giving specific lessons to continue what they've been doing, we completely shifted gears and gave them assignments and activities which were much more to their liking, of either writing music or recording songs, recording multi-tracks of their songs, or researching their favorite song and finding out more about it and doing something very personally oriented. And I think that was a good thing. One of the drawbacks is that that works great for a motivated kid, for a kid who's a high achiever and does what they're supposed to do. But if you're lazy and you are a slacker, then it's easy to just stay in bed and then to let all of your classes pile up. And the next thing you know, you're failing everything because you've done nothing, and blame it on just being unmotivated and not caring. So I don't know. I even think most of my colleagues who are academic teachers would say they don't prefer this kind of teaching method.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, Barbara Jewell.
What's going to happen in the fall? When do you get back?
The school superintendent today is making a statement at 12 right now, between 12 and 1, and we don't know if he's going to make a revolutionary change or if things are going to be status quo. It looks like right now, as of this morning, we're supposed to be in small groups and do social distancing, which is difficult if you have 30 kids in a class, because they're sitting literally 3 feet apart, not 6 feet apart. So it might mean that we're gonna split school up and do certain students on certain days or different things like that. That's what I've heard. Or it could just be like what you were talking about before the meeting started in Danville late at night, that everything is kind of bursting back into a sense of normalcy, and that maybe the walls are going to just come crashing down all at once. I don't know what to expect, but whatever it is, it'll be led by state example.
Okay, Vic Giorgio.
Ken, would you mind my putting your presentation up on my YouTube channel?
Not at all.
That'd be awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. Any
Well, I
other?
want to thank everyone for having me today. I didn't realize how much fun it was going to be. I didn't take it too seriously at first. I thought I'd just wing it. And then this weekend, I decided I should do a little homework. So it was fun reliving all the memory and looking at the pictures. As you can see, there were no pictures from New York because that's 20 years ago. And that computer no longer exists. And I'm sure I saved some files somewhere, but I don't know where they are.
Well, thank you for joining us and sharing your great travel log with us, and for being an inspiration to the kids that you teach, and being a great emissary from Danville to the world.
Thank you.
Thank you for
It's
all
my
that
pleasure.
you do.
Great.
And in recognition of your speaking today, our club donates money to Polio Plus, which is the Rotary International effort to eradicate polio, which is almost complete, but not quite there yet, in our speaker's name. So a donation will be made in your name.
Awesome. Thank you.
So thanks again for joining us, and you're welcome to stick around for a few minutes of ending club business, or if not,
Well, actually, since you didn't give me any lunch, I'm starving, so I'm gonna go eat.
We know the feeling.
eat front lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Very good.
It was great.